the deputy president, because that is how things have worked out over the last 5 administrations. The deputy president of the party is the deputy president of the country. Unless some new development happens in the African National Congress, and these are the days of miracle and wonder, anything is possible, I suspect we are on track for Deputy President David Mabuza. Also, what Mr. Mabe just said makes me believe that there will be some continuity.
All right. Lebohang, you're with us by Skype tonight. What kind of deputy president do you think David Mabuza wants to be? Do you think that he has an idea of the role that he wants to fill? Constitutionally, of course, it's really up to President Cyril Ramaphosa to give him duties and powers.
Well, I think Mr. Mabuza is best placed to respond to that himself. But I do think that, of course, if we apply the one heartbeat away principle, we would want somebody who is able to externalize South Africa's footprint internationally, would also want somebody who's able to externalize South Africa's economic interests, and to a great extent to build that connection between finding cross-party consensus internally and finding that consensus in a way that also reflects South Africa's position internationally. And I say this because I think the last 10 years in particular, we've had a shrunken footprint, and we certainly need the president and the deputy president both to be able to re-articulate and re-galvanize that in ways that are extremely dynamic and extremely in tune with the times that we're living in.
In the last few years, we've seen the president, if we go back through the relationship between then-President Jacob Zuma and then Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa, if we go back to then-President Thabo Mbeki and then Deputy President Jacob Zuma, we've seen a situation where it can almost look as if the president doesn't like a rival and so gives the deputy president, shall I say, difficult situations to deal with. Ramaphosa had to deal with Eskom in the Sudan, for example. Do you think that Ramaphosa will try the same strategy here, or do you think there might actually be a different relationship between the two of them?
No harm in trying, but certainly, I mean, there are a couple of reasons that one would do that. Number one is, I think, natural competitiveness. You wouldn't want a situation where a person feels so emboldened that they may be able to do the job that you're doing better than you do it yourself. But of course, if you go back to the one heartbeat principle, that's exactly what you should be doing. But secondly, I think it's absolutely important to have a complementary set of personality skills between the president and the deputy president. I mean, I think that one would argue that Deputy President Mabuza is much more a grassroots-orientated organizer, and that's where his strength has been. He organized his way literally out of Malanga to the deputy presidency with a horde of extremely unfortunate allegations shadowing him that perhaps it seems that he's been exonerated by the Integrity Commission, but nonetheless the shadows of that still remain. And of course, the mismanagement in the province is something that's quite concerning. But I think as a movement builder internally, as a movement mobilizer, that seems to be one of his key political strengths. And he has something that President Ramaphosa doesn't have per se, which is an internal constituency. President Ramaphosa's constituency is much more outward looking. It's much more corporate. It is much more external funders, investors, and those sorts of people. But per se, he hasn't got a grassroots, a grassroots constituency at all. He hasn't had one possibly since the trade union days. So there's a level of complementarity between the two, which is very important. And that's not just about the personalities, but that is a principal position in terms of how we want the balance of forces to equilibrate themselves within the ANC and within the state.
Angelo, there seems to be a complicated game going on here. If we go back a week ago to when members of Parliament were being sworn in on Thursday, or Wednesday, in fact it was, if David Mabuza had been sworn in then, he'll probably be Deputy President by now. He'll probably be Deputy President almost certainly by the end of the week. What do you think he's gained through all of this?
Well, I think that we must remember that the African National Congress governs in a tripartite alliance, and so it's not just Didi Mabuza who is one of the figures in that relationship. There are other people who and other forces at work, so it is about what the ANC likes to call the balance of forces. I suspect that this was technically about clearing one's name and also forcing, these people play three-dimensional chess. They're constantly, there are 15 moves that the rest of us do not see. But this is also parallel to another process where a public protector's report is implicating a figure who is seen to be, by many people, key to Mr. Ramaphosa's sixth administration. So there are all sorts of complicated games that are parallel to one another, and the question that one has to ask is whether this was Mr. Mabuza's way of indicating that he was engaging the formal process in the party. Now that that process to his satisfaction has been completed, he is ready to take his post in Parliament, and Mr. Ramaphosa has to welcome him in. Let's not forget that none of this succession issue would even have arisen had the ANC not been as factionalized as it is. If, as we see in other parties around the world, the party is in disarray, the competition for leadership position is actually being run while leadership is not under contestation. And the ANC can ill afford to have that situation unfold inside its ranks 2 years down from its last elective conference, and the country can ill afford to have a deputy president and a president at odds with one another. And so the calls for unity inside the ANC is absolutely in the country's interest, because whatever game is being played about 2024 or 2021, these games must be subservient to the needs of the country and the Republic of South Africa as a whole.
In the middle of all of this, Angelo, is the Secretary General, S. Magashule, who's been, I think, quite quiet in the last couple of days in the middle of all of this. Could this game involve him in some way? Because it seems that there might be claims that come against him. He might want to look at however David Mabuza has been treated by the Integrity Commission. Precedents could be set that could matter later.
One presumes that precedents have been set in this process, and that Mr. Magashule has his keen eye on how that works out. And as Mr. Mabej has indicated, the reports eventually sit in his office. So it will be an interesting development to have the office which the reports have to sit in from the Integrity Commission, if the head of that office is suddenly implicated in and must appear before the Integrity Commission. And how that will work itself out in the shall we say, the state mechanisms that are now realigning in sixth administration, post-New Dawn, New Direction, Cyril Ramaphosa, South Africa, that I think needs to be checked in, because the party's test will be whether or not they defend the man against the institution, whether they stand by or stand back from the allegations, or whether they do what they have done before, which is to stand by their man Tammy Wynette style, come whatever may, they will support him. That may come to be a test for them. Do they stand with the institutions that they've just re-empowered, or do they stand with the man who is being challenged by those institutions should that time come?
I mean, the other question, of course, tonight is around Pravin Gordhan. We've got the Public Protector's report into him, the findings that he should be disciplined by President Ramaphosa. At the same time, we have Gordhan's legal challenge, legal papers filed today by his attorney, Tebogo Molachi. Do you think Ramaphosa is just going to dare the EFF and the Public Protector and appoint him anyway?
Anything is possible. I mean, the one thing that has happened with President Ramaphosa is that he hasn't actually made very bold moves previously. He may be able to do so now because he has an electoral mandate rather than a party mandate, which is quite important. However, I'm not sure whether or not he'll be able to break rank with the ANC in the ways that we have seen previously. We haven't seen the ANC historically, as Angelo is saying, being able to be as robust, I think, in their critique and in their capacity to discipline their own heads very rarely roll within the ANC. And I think it's also about who it is. And Pravin Gordhan has been an extremely important figure, controversial figure, vilified by some and certainly valorized by others for his very important stands in the moments that mattered, I suppose one would say, during the Zuma administration and in the transition into the Ramaphosa administration. In terms of just continuity, he's a handy guy to have around. And I think this is a moment where I think President Ramaphosa needs to decide what kind of presidency he wants to have. And I think the other thing that one would argue is that, frankly, in the kingdom of the blind, the one with one eye is king. And in the morass of really tarnished characters, Pravin Gordhan's head is certainly not the one that the court of public opinion may per se feel is the one that needs to roll the hardest or the first.
The other person that people will be looking at, of course, is, I call him Governor Emeritus tonight. I might call him Minister again tomorrow, Tito Mboweni. He's also Twitter's favourite chef this week. Do you think that he'll be reappointed?
He probably will, for the same reason. I mean, that kind of continuity dogma. I think the concern that some people might have with Mr. Mboweni is that he seems to be slightly out of touch, I think, with the current challenges and the current discourses. And I think this has been seen by his pronouncements over the last few months as minister, notwithstanding his eccentric and eclectic social media private life, which is, of course, plays itself out very publicly, which is a whole other problem. But I do think that in terms of his own approach to fiscal discipline, to austerity, to the way that the country needs to be governed, but also the sentiments, some of the key sentiments of where people are in terms of poverty eradication, the way that the economy needs to be galvanized to ensure that it's much more inclusive. He's made some very insensitive comments, I think, some very insensitive comments in relation to the young people who were uprising around fees and the affordability of their education and so on. So I think that even though I've heard constantly ad nauseum a safe pair of hands, and I'm not sure if that pair of hands is so safe, and I'm not also sure whether that pair of hands is as responsive to today's challenges that it needs to be. This is not the Mbeki era. The South African economy is not performing as well as it was. We have not grown since the Mbeki era. And I think that to use the same kind of languaging and the same kind of discourse setting is extremely unfortunate and is a bit adrift with very key immediate challenges that need to be addressed. And I think with a minister that needs to show himself to be in sympathy with, in empathy with certainly the difficult circumstances and the suffering of the majority of African people in this country.
Angelo, very quickly, if we can, very quickly, the situation in trying to create a cabinet in the ANC has always been difficult, lots of different constituencies. It seems to be getting harder.
Well, the further you go away from the rainbow moment and the magic moment of 1994, the harder it is going to get. And also, this is not just in South Africa. If we look at Theresa May's experience recently, cabinet formation is no longer easy anywhere in the world in politics. Donald Trump has shown the same thing. So it's going to be tough, for anybody going ahead.
Angelo, thank you very much indeed. Director of the OWL Socioeconomics Research Institute, Lebogang Pheko, really do appreciate it. Research Fellow at the Trade Collective think tank. Thank you very much indeed, both. All right, that's the politics for the moment. Time for some sport. Tabiso.
All right there, Stephen. Hectic